So the situation that we have right now is that you understand the model view controller design pattern. You understand this because we looked at BookVoter and we looked at the login controller for BookVoter and the code that makes that work. We looked at login view as well. And then we talked about the model. So the model that the login controller messes around with is the user objects. And we also looked at another design pattern called the data access object design pattern. And we looked at the code for the user DAO, which is an example of the data access object design pattern. So the user DAO is responsible for manipulating user models in some sort of data store. And it hides the details of how that manipulation happens from anything that wants to use it. For example, the login controller. Okay, so what I want to do now is fairly quickly move through how the survey controller and survey view work and how the results controller and results view work. And in the process of doing that, we'll review the model view controller because we have to see it for two other sets of web pages that we're working with. And then we'll also get to review the data access object design pattern because we're going to get to look at a book DAO and how that manages books and the book model as well. All right, so I'm going to log in here as Bob and my password, hit submit, and now I get to vote for a book. So I've triggered the survey controller. So the first time the survey controller gets hit, it says, hey, was there an actual vote for a book? The answer is no. So then it presents a set of radio buttons and I can select one of them. Given that we're dealing with coronavirus right now, I highly recommend reading the book The Stand. It's quite an interesting read. And I'm going to select that as the book that I want to vote for. Okay, I click submit. Now I actually provided something when I hit the survey controller. And so that triggers some work with the survey controller view. And then that gets us to the results controller. And it's the results controller's job in BookVoter to figure out how to update the data store with a new vote. And you can see the stand went from vote of 1 to a vote of 2. And so the survey or the results controller displays that result, but it also changes the data store using the book model and the book DAO. All right, so now we're going to take a look at the code that makes the survey controller work and then the code that makes the results controller work. We'll look at the survey view, results view, and we'll also look at the book model and book DAO. Okay, so I could stop this. Huh, that's not cool. I think we can do a hard reset here. Huh. All right, goodbye. Yeah, we can get rid of it. Let's try terminal window again. Sorry about this. Okay. All right, so we're in. Now, what I want to do is I want to look at the survey controller. And we'll just expand this so we can look at it, and we'll just talk about the code here. So here is the constructor. So the constructor is going to get hit just like the login view or login controller is going to get hit when you make a web page request to view this survey controller.py. Now that's going to happen via the redirect from the login view. So the login view is going to say, spit out some HTML to the browser that says, I want you to redirect to the survey controller. And oh, by the way, here's a cookie that contains some user information. All right, so here's what's going on. The first little bit of code actually gets the cookie. So that should look familiar because we did this when we introduced the whole idea of programming using Python and the web. And now we have an attempt to get the ISBN number of the book. If you recall, the way the survey controller worked is we had a set of radio buttons that represented books. And if you clicked on a book and clicked submit, what it submitted was the ISBN number for the book. And so on these lines here, we're attempting to get the ISBN number. All right. So just like the login controller, the next thing we do once we've gotten information that we need from the web request or web, let's see, it would be HTTP request, from the HTTP request that's going back to the Python code, we're going to create a view. The view hides all of the details of all of the HTML that we're going to send back to the browser in response to a request for Survey Controller to do something. So the view is either going to be the list of radio buttons with the submit button in a form, or it's going to be a redirect that goes to the results page because we have a vote from the user. All right, so here's the code that makes that decision. The controller is making the decision. If ISBN is not none, that means that there is a form submit. So we have an ISBN number. And so what we're going to do is we're going to store the ISBN number in a cookie. Now, if you look up top here, the ISBN number was stored in the form submission, but it's not in the cookie. Now, that's fine for surveycontroller.py, but if we want to go to resultscontroller.py, we need to find a way to get that ISBN number information forwarded to resultscontroller.py. And the way you do that is by saving the ISBN number as a cookie. So that's what's happening right here. And then we call view redirect. So recall, view right up here is a survey view object that hides all of the HTML specifics from the controller. So it allows your controller to look super clean, neat, and tidy, and organized. All right. So there's the view redirect, and that's going to move us to results controller if we actually clicked something on, selected a radio button. If there is no form ISBN number available, it means this is the first time the user has landed on the form. And so in that case, what we need to do is we need to return the HTML that will display the form with the submit button. So how are we going to make that work? Well, this is how we're going to make it work. We're going to create a book DAO. So the book DAO acts as that interface between the controller and the complexity of how books are stored in a data store, whether it's in a database or in a file or out on a network or whatever. That's all hidden from the survey controller. And then we're going via the book DAO. And then we're going to call a method on the DAO called selectAll. So you remember we wrote some code for the user DAO to make selectAll work. There's something very similar that works with books. We'll take a look at that in a second. And the cool thing is, all of this should look super familiar if you understand how user DAO works. All right. Now that we have the collection of books, we're going to call the view's view method, which is responsible for displaying a form with radio buttons and books information and the ISBN number hidden in that book information and the form submit button. But here in the controller, we don't have to worry about any of that complexity. All we're doing is we're saying, hey, view, here's a bunch of books. Figure out how to render it, do whatever magic you want to do with the view. Okay, and then the last line of code here in the survey controller is the main program. So when you, from the browser, say I want to look at the survey controller, in this case the browser is saying I want to do a redirect to the survey controller, it's going to invoke this one line of code that sets controller equal to survey controller. That triggers the constructor for survey controller, And that triggers all of this code. Okay, cool. So that's the survey controller. So what we should do next is we should take a look at the surveyView.py file. All right, that's responsible for the spitting HTML back to the browser, either a redirect or a view that displays the radio button form. So let's take a look at surveyView.py. All right, so 2 parts. Part 1 is the redirect. So the cool thing about this redirect is it's almost exactly like the redirect for the login controller or the login view. We are just printing out cookie output, and the cool thing is that the survey view itself doesn't have any idea what any of the cookies are. It's just given to that information by the controller, by the survey controller. And then we're going to redirect to resultscontroller.py. So that's the special controller that we're going to go to when we jump from survey controller to the next page. All right. So that's the redirect. Pretty cool. Let's take a look at the view. The view's kind of interesting. So the view takes a single argument, which is a collection of books. And what we're going to have to do is basically go through the collection and figure out how to convert each book model into a radio button. All right? So all of this stuff is basically hard-coded. We have a special action in the form that says, when you do submit, I want to go back to the survey controller. And now let's take a look at the code. This is so great. It's just a few lines of code. Here's the code that actually creates the radio buttons. So we say for book and book, because books is the collection of books that was retrieved from the data store by the DAO in survey controller and passed into this method. So for book and books, we're going to print input type radio, name equals ISBN. I'll catch up to my speaking here. Value, this is hiding the book ISBN, so no one's going to see the book ISBN, but it's going to be hidden in the radio button. And then we print out book title by book author, and then we print out the number of votes. So all this does in a string, and I added a little bit of formatting here. This is kind of a cheatsy doodle because we could do this better with some CSS, but it's there to keep things a little bit simple. And then we have the submit button, close the form, close body, and close HTML. So the only complicated thing that's happening here is the iteration through the book models in the collection of books returned by the DAO, and that's actually not that complicated. So this is really cool, right? If you think about all of the messiness that's involved in these print statements and how it's all collected inside the survey view, we've really done a nice job of adhering to the model view controller design pattern. Book is the model, survey controller is the controller, and survey view is the view. All right? So now that we've done that, let's go back to the controller again. I'm going to do some cool buffer menu. You could do this too if you're really cool with Emacs. And you just have to hit enter when you get to the file that you want there in the buffer menu. So the only other piece of information that we should probably explore is the book DAO. All right, so the book DAO has at least one method called selectAll. Actually, it has all of the CRUD methods, the create, read, update, and delete methods, because when you create a DAO, you just do that. Whether a program that you're writing at the moment needs it or not, you are eventually going to need to be able to create, read, update, and delete. And in this case, we're create, read, update, and delete books. So we have one specialized read method called selectAll, but we could have other specialized read methods. And then we have an insert method, an insert method, an update method, and a delete method. All right, so let's take a look at the code for the book DAO. Well, let's take a look at the code for the book.py, the model for the book. So the model for the book is pretty straightforward. A book has a title, an author, votes, and ISBN. And so the constructor takes in title, author. Oh, that's interesting. I don't like that. I like to do things in the same order. So it looks like votes is last. So even though this doesn't really change the execution of the code, it's really good programming practice, right? I'm lining up the order that I do things with the order that they appear as arguments in the constructor. All right, it's just like when you see this kind of code, you think, boy, this programmer really knows what they're doing. This is clean code. And clean code is reliable code and predictable code. And also, if you think about it, right, every time you write a constructor that takes in a bunch of arguments, if you use this pattern for setting the members using a constructor, then you don't really have to think a lot about how does a constructor set the members of the object. You just do it this way. They should have the same, all the arguments passed into the constructor should have the same name as the members, and then you use self or this or whatever to distinguish between the title that belongs to the object and the title that's passed in as an argument. And you do the sets in the same order that they appear as arguments. It's just really good programming practice. All right, and then I have a toString method that outputs the title, author, ISBN, and votes. And notice it's the same order that they appear in the constructor, the same order that I do the sets. There's no surprises. There's this discipline of consistency in the model. But the model's pretty simple. Okay, let's take a look at the book DAO then. So, I added the logger. I'm such a good guy here. You really should probably put the logger in every method. Just these 5 statements. What this is going to do is give you the option later to use the logger to do stuff. So just good habit to put it in there. Okay, so here's the book DAO. Now, the first thing we're doing is we're setting the file name. If you remember, the constructor for the user DAO did basically that. The only thing the constructor did is internally set some information about the location of the data store. If this was a database, if the book DAO connected to a database instead of a file, this information might be, here's the IP address of the machine that contains the database. Here's the password and user ID to connect to that machine. Here's the database that I want to use in that machine. Here's the table in the database that I want to use. So all that information would get set up in the constructor. All right, here's read books. It's basically exactly like the read books for, or sorry, the read user method. In fact, I recall I made one change here. Let's just talk through it. Result is an empty list. Open the file, read all the files into the collection lines, and then iterate through lines, splitting on a comma. So we're separating the different fields in the book by commas. Spaces won't work because like the title has spaces in it, so we can't use spaces to separate fields. And I'm going to call this row instead of raw. It's just consistent. So we're going to split on commas instead of spaces. A book is, once we've gotten the raw row, which is just a collection of data fields in the line that's stored in the file, then we're going to call this method row2book, which takes the collection of items in the data store and converts it into a row model object. And then we append that to book. And so when we're done, we're going to return a list of books. All right, write books. Looks pretty darn similar, except again, I'm being a little bit inconsistent here because I'm calling it book to row. So I'm going to call this row, and I'm going to call this, change that line to row. Okay, so for book and books, row equals self book to row. So we're going to take a book model object and convert it into a row, there's going to be some commas, and then we're going to output, we're going to have that stored in a string, and then we're going to say file.write and write out the row. Okay, and then file.close. And here's the row to book method. So the row to book method takes a row, which is going to be a list of data fields, and converts that row into a book consisting of the fields in the book. Notice the last field is an integer, which represents the number of votes, and then we return it. And now here's the book converting book to row, which takes a book model consisting of title, author, ISBN, and votes, and converts it into a string that's separated by commas, comma separated CSV, comma separated value string, and then returns that row. All right, so so far so good. Now let's just drop down here for a second. Here's select all. And what that does is it just calls self.readBooks, which will then return all the books. That's the method that we used in the login controller to get all the books that got passed. Sorry, not login controller, the survey controller. That then once we collected the books, we called survey view and passed in the collection of books. Survey view processed that collection and turned all the books into radio buttons. So I don't really like this self.readBooks. I'm changed my mind. Kind of like, since we already have, oh no, this is okay. We have to do this, self.readBooks, calling the readbooks method. But select by ISBN, we're going to change that. Instead of saying self.readBooks, we're going to say self.selectAll. Okay, so select all looks exactly the same as the select all for the user DAO. Select by ISBN is a little bit different. But the same kind of idea. Instead of selecting by user ID, we're selecting by ISBN. We get a collection of books. We do iterate through the collection, and when we find a match between the book's ISBN and the ISBN that was passed in by select by ISBN, we return that book. Otherwise, we're going to return none. Okay, insert. Okay, here's another place where we can eat our own dog food and say self.selectAll. They do the same thing, but I feel like it's better to use selectAll because you're kind of eating your own dog food in that case. So we get the collection of books, and once we have the collection of books, then we append the new book to the collection, and then we write out the collection of books. All right, let's take a look at update. So same thing, we're going to say select all. Well, actually, I think we can do this a little bit better. Update could use delete. So let's do that. Let's modify this delete so it's a little bit better. I want to do delete first, and then we can do update. Let's get the spacing for this matched. So what we did with users is we said, oh, it's actually, well, yeah, let's just take a look. So for delete, what we're going to do is say self.selectAll. Now we have all the books. And then we're going to say, all right, we're going to look for the old book in books. All right, and we're going to keep searching for the old book in books. If we find a match, we're going to remove the old book. Okay, so let's talk through the code for this and see if we can simplify it a little bit. So for old book in books, if we match the old book's ISBN with the book ISBN of the book that we are was passed in to delete, then we know what we're supposed to delete. And so I think what we can do to make this a little simpler is, this is kind of complicated. So why don't we do a books.remove of old book, and then we're going to do a self.write books of books, and then we're going to return. Now, if we get out of here and we don't actually get a match, so we escape this for loop and we never matched old book ISBN to an ISBN, it means that we're trying to delete a book that doesn't have an ISBN match in the data store. So if we're in that situation, that's an error. So I've got an old print statement here, which we really need to clean up. Let's make this a logger.debug. And the only thing I need to erase here is that. And now we have it. And actually, I wouldn't even say that's a debug. I would say that's just an error. So I would say logger.error. Okay, and let's get rid of all this other code. I think that's much cleaner, don't you? I like clean code. It's good to go back and review things and clean them up. All right, so the way delete works is get me all the books. Now, iterate through the books, looking for a match with the ISBN number of the book that got passed in to delete. If we find that match, remove the old book from the list of books, and then write out the list of books and return. If we escape the for loop and we never trigger this if statement, that's an error. And so we're going to use the logger to write out, we don't even need to say book.dow update because the logger's so smart. Actually, that's an error anyway. We'll say unable to find book to delete ISBN. Okay, great. So I really like this method. It's much cleaner and much more organized than it was originally. Every time I teach the course, make things better. All right, so let's take a look at the update method. So the update method is way simpler than all this code. In fact, this code's kind of repetitive, and that's always trouble. All we're going to do for update is we're going to delete, self.delete book. So we're going to remove the book, and then we're going to say self.insert book. So we're going to delete the book, which will trigger this delete method, which will delete the original book from the data store. And then we're going to insert the book into the data store. Perfect. All right, let's take a look at populate. So this is too tricky. Let me think about this. So yeah, no, we have to do it. We kind of have to do it this way because right, we have to do self-write. I'm just thinking about books.append. Self.book to row book. Yeah, we have to do it this way. So we create the list of books, and then we do a self.write books, which will overwrite the file of books with the books that are in this collection. And it's just resetting the titles, it's resetting the counts essentially of all the books, because the list of books in the BookVoter data store never changes. All right, cool. So that takes care of populate, and that takes care of the book.dow. Now let's just go look at the book, books.txt. Oops. That's up here. So there you see all the books, and they're separated by commas, and they have counts after them, and those counts get updated as things move along. All right, so we have a controller and a view to look at, and then we're basically done. So let's take a look at the survey view controller. Oh, not survey, sorry. The results. Oh, we have to go to CGI. I love tab. Okay, so let's take a look at the code for the results controller. So once you've selected your book and the radio button, click submit, there's a redirect from the survey view HTML that gets spit back to the browser that says go to the results controller. So let's take a look at what happens in the results controller. So first of all, we're going to get some cookies. Now, there's actually two delicious cookies in the survey controller, or sorry, results controller. The first delicious cookie is the user ID. So we're going to grab that and pull it out of the cookie and store it in a variable. And then the ISBN of the book that the user wanted, that the user voted for, is also in here. So we're going to grab that out of the cookie and store that in the ISBN variable. And then we're going to do something kind of interesting. We're going to expire the user ID, and we're going to expire the cookie. So when we do this expire action, what happens is that the cookie itself is then effectively instructions go back to the browser to remove the cookie from the from what's being managed by the browser. So the user ID cookie and the ISBN cookie will disappear. Okay, so once we've gotten rid of the cookies and we have the user ID and ISBN to work with, we're going to get the results view. And when we do the results view, this time we're in a situation where there's only one thing that the user is going to see. There's no form for the user to interact with. So we don't have to make a decision like, is this the first time we're looking at the page, or did the user interact with the form and we have to process that interaction? None of that happens here. All we're going to do is display the list of books with their current vote values, and then we're also going to do a little bit of work to update the data store with a new count for the book that the user voted for. So first, we grab the view, and then second, we update the vote count. And this is so awesome how this happens. So we're going to say, hey, BookDAO, we'd like to grab you. All right, BookDAO, give me the book that has the ISBN that matches the radio button ISBN for the book the user selected from the previous page. So we're going to grab that ISBN. We're going to increment the BookVotes member. Remember, the BookVotes member has a the book member has a votes field. That votes field is an integer because when we converted the raw books from the books.txt file, the row to book method converted the votes from a string to an integer. So that's really cool. So we can add one to BookVotes, and then we say DAO update book. So think about it, all the complexity of all of the file opening and tracking down a particular book and like changing and all that stuff, it's all hidden from the controller. The controller just says, hey DAO, get me the book that has this particular ISBN. Let's update its count. Hey DAO, I want to update the book. All right, so this is awesome. Just a few lines of code. It really keeps the the controller code really simple. All right, then what we're going to do is we're going to say display view, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to, then what we're going to do is display the view. Actually, this is silly. I'm going to get rid of this display view, display form, because that comment doesn't match what we're doing here. Okay, so then what we're going to do is display the view to the user, the results view, and the way that works is we're going to get the collection of all the books, and that collection will include the book with the vote count updated for the book that the user selected. when we do the select all because it represents something, the way the data store looks after the update happens. So then we're going to say DAO.selectAll, that returns all of the books, and then we're going to call the view, and we're going to pass in two pieces of information. The cookie, the reason why we're doing that is because we want to expire these cookies. We want to tell the browser, hey, don't mess around with the user ID cookie or the ISBN cookie. And then we're also passing in the books collection because we want to go through all of the books and render each book along with its vote. All right. And then the last piece of code here is just like all the other controllers. It's just a single line in the main program that says controller equals results controller that triggers the creation of a results controller object and invokes the constructor, which is where all of this code is. Okay? So let's look at the one final piece of information that we need to look at, which is the view, the results controller view. Oops. Okay, so there's just one method called view. In the previous views, both login view and survey view, there was a redirect method, but in this results view class, there is only one method, the view method. It takes in a cookie and book. So the cookie output basically says, hey, wipe out any cookies that are around. We're not interested in them anymore. And then we print out the list of books in our collection. And it's just a real simple list. We do a for book in books, and then we call a print, which prints out the book title, the book author, and the number of votes for the book. There's no ISBN that needs to be printed here. The user doesn't really care about the ISBN, so we just hide that. And we print all the books out, and then we close the unordered list that contains the list of books, close the body, and close the HTML. And that, my friends, is how we're going to do version 2 of your email program. So we have this sort of homegrown web framework that we created that consists of using the model view controller design pattern and using the data access object design pattern. This will vastly simplify your code. You're going to enjoy this because you get to clean it all up and make it nice and neat and tidy. And there's something that feels really good about having a program that works. But there's something that feels really good about having a program that works that is also a well-organized and well-oiled machine. And that is what you're going to do for your next homework assignment. So what my expectation is that as you work on the email program version 2, that you're going to have a set of controllers for every page that you go to, a set of views for each one of those pages, and also a collection of models, probably a user model and maybe one or more types of email models, and then a set of DAOs, definitely a user DAO, and one or more email DAOs depending on how you manage your emails. Each one of those DAOs is going to be connected to some kind of data store, basically a text file, and you're going to use the DAOs to CRUD, create, read, and update the emails that are managed in those data stores. All right, that ends version 2 of the web system that we're going to build. Now, as a heads up, the next version that we're going to build, version 3, instead of using a homegrown framework, we're going to use a framework that's pretty popular with Python developers called Flask. What's cool about Flask is it works really well with the model view controller architecture, and it works really well with the data access design pattern. And so it'll be really cool once you really get viscerally these two design patterns, model view controller and data access object. When we move to Flask, you're going to be like, oh my God, this is so great. Flask is the best thing in the world. So it's a nice way to wrap up our discussion of web programming before we head into JavaScript. All right, good luck, and make sure you check in with me or check in during my office hours if you have questions as you work on the next program.